Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, nagyon nagy szeretettel köszöntöm a konferencia résztvevőit.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We will now continue our conference. My name is Károly Páncél. I am a member of the Hungarian Parliament as well as the chair of the National Unity Committee of the Hungarian National Assembly. Welcome. The committee I am chairing is primarily dedicated to issues of nation policy. We strongly believe that the most important priority of each state must be to make sure that the nation will be prosperous, and we Hungarians are not to blame for the fact that our nation expands beyond our borders. So as it is stated in our fundamental law, it is our duty and responsibility to make sure that Hungarian minorities living beyond our borders enjoy the possibility to preserve their national cultural heritage as well as language rights. So networking and maintaining relations with them is a priority for us. And during our work, in the course of our work, we encounter a number of different situations, some more favorable, in other cases less favorable situations. There are in some cases where the national minorities are viewed as the constituents of the state, as is the case in Hungary as well, but in some other cases they do not feel treated as equals. So it is a very important priority for us to help them preserve and develop their cultural identity. This is the foundation of our work, and it is also what the survival of individual communities depends on. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome the forthcoming speakers of this panel of our conference today. Zsolt Németh, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Assembly of Hungary, as well as the head of the delegation to the European Council. Javier Maroto, Speaker of the Vice President of the Spanish Senate. Ms. Elvira Kovács, Vice President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia. And now I respectfully invite Mr. Zsolt Németh, Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the National Assembly of Hungary and head of the delegation of the Assembly to the Council of Europe, to make his presentation. Distinguished Mr. President, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome all of you in Hungary, especially those who are from abroad. And I would like to welcome the representatives of the Hungarian minority communities from the neighboring countries and the members of the Hungarian National Minority Committee of the Hungarian National Assembly, who are representing the Hungarian national minorities inside Hungary. Our meeting is dedicated to the issue of minority protection in the context of cultural heritage protection. Speaking of cultural heritage protection these days, first of all, one cannot help but recall the terrible destruction of the built, of course not only the built heritage that the Russian aggression against Ukraine has brought about. It is worth recalling, for example, that during the phase of aggression since 24 of February 2022, the Russian army destroyed or damaged beyond use more than 630 religious buildings, churches, synagogues, mosques, prayer houses, congregational halls by the end of 2023. This is a shocking statistic in itself. However, it is even more shocking that the relative majority of religious properties destroyed or rendered unusable by Russian forces, 187 properties, nearly a third of all religious properties destroyed, were used by the Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, which Russia is supposedly defending. Hard to understand. Russia is protecting the Orthodox belonging to the Moscow Patriarchate by blowing up their churches. Please don't be surprised if you don't understand the logic of this. With European common sense, this is simply not understandable or even comprehensible. It is simply that the Russian minority protection narrative has absolutely nothing to do with what we in Europe call minority protection. That's why I would like to start with this very actual challenge in front of the international minority protection. For European minority protection, the most important value is the person belonging to a national and ethnic minority, and thus this person's language, culture, community's harmonious coexistence with the majority, and of course their cultural heritage. The core of the Russian minority protection narrative, however, is the restoration of control over the territories inhabited by Russians. And of course, the people living in those territories, Russians and non-Russians. If this objective is supported by cultural heritage, then it can be cited, argued for, demanded, but if it gets in the way, it can be shot to pieces. Otherwise, according to this concept, not only cultural heritage can be shot to pieces, but also the people belonging to the minority itself, if they get in the way of the territorial control. Since the Russian army is in its military aggression against Ukraine, it is not at all embarrassed by shooting at a significant number of Russian-speaking people under the pretext of protecting them. I recall all this to draw attention to the unprecedented challenge that the Russian minority protection narrative poses to the international minority protection system, and as part of it, to European minority protection mechanisms. This is one of the most serious challenges in front of us, all of us who are interested in the protection of national minorities. The Russian narrative is challenging because it tries to sell itself as minority protection. If Russia succeeds in being accepted as minority protector, it will partially or completely override the concept that international law has so far called minority protection. In current international law, and thus in European minority protection law as well, the essence of minority protection is that it cannot serve any other purpose than the protection of the rights of those belonging to a minority, to be different, the right to be different, as it was said in the previous lectures. Anything that serves another purpose is not minority protection, even if it calls itself minority protection. We must state very firmly that any instrumentalization of minorities is outside the concept of minority protection. I propose that we say this at our conference and then advocate it in every possible forum. Sooner or later, we hope sooner rather than later, the war launched by Russia against Ukraine will end. We have good chances for this, as the new developments in the United States reflected. From the point of view of minority protection, Europe must be very careful that Russia does not steal and redefine the concept of minority protection under the pretext of the end of the war. Stealing minority protection would be if the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine were given some kind of rights because Russia attacked Ukraine. And finally, after the extermination of a few 100,000 people and the destruction of an immense amount of material value, suddenly agreed to stop waging war. We need a settlement that makes it clear that war is not a means of minority protection. We can in no way justify that. Therefore, it must be avoided at all costs that as a result of the war, Russian-speaking people in Ukraine receive additional rights compared to other minorities, like Greeks, Bulgarians, Hungarians, and the rest. They should only be given the rights that other minorities have, and the others should be given the rights that the Russians will have as a consequence. For they are entitled to any rights not because Russia used military force, but because they are Ukrainian citizens, Russian-speaking as well as non-Russian-speaking. Rights should not stem from war, but from Ukraine's commitment to functioning as a sovereign, democratic state, governed by the rule of law. We will do our utmost. When Ukraine is going to be entering the discussion with the European Union, I'm sure you have heard about the great success that a minority action plan is required from the Ukraine to implement in the process of the accession process towards the European Union. We are very proud of this development, which has been actually exercised first by the European Union vis-à-vis Serbia, when the Minority Action Plan was first adopted by the EU. I see the same principle as necessary for the Middle East conflict. This is the other very serious problem we are confronting. The war in the Holy Land, or at least in current phase, will also end sooner or later, because there is a very clear also American commitment to do that. There too it should be a fundamental principle that Hamas's attack on the 7th of October 2023 does not give the Palestinians the basis for acquiring any new rights. Illegitimate violence must not be justified by ethnopolitics. The future settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict must stem from the mutual security interests of the two sides based on human rights, and not from war, and not from terrorism against the Israelis, against the Jewish population in the Middle East. And not because, as a result of immigration, many Palestinians and many Muslims live in West European countries and try to impose their will on European governments through demonstrations. The source of the European position cannot be mass pressure from immigrants. This is also what we mean by not importing conflict into Europe. Neither war nor mass pressure can move Europe out of its values. Minority rights must be guaranteed because, and only because, people in minority situations are equal and valuable citizens of the society, and this can only be achieved through democratic means, not by force. In order for Europe to take a credible position on all these issues, it must be set a good example at home. In this respect, we are not in a bad position, as European countries as a whole can offer a whole arsenal of various good practices in minority protection as an example for both candidate countries and other countries in our vicinity and in the world. The minority and regional autonomy systems in Serbia, in Italy, or in Spain are particularly valuable pieces of this arsenal, but many other examples could be cited. The European Union accepts the Council of Europe's minority rights documents, which also falls within the scope of leading by example. In addition to this, I would draw your attention to the very important development that the EU is now coming closer and closer to joining the European Convention on Human Rights. And the convention system of our organization in the Council of Europe is also something that we would like to offer to the European Union to join when, at a point, this minority protection system inside the EU is going to be established. In addition, these good practices are crowned by Article 2 of the Treaty on European Union, which draws attention to the fact that respect for human rights includes respect for the rights of persons belonging to minorities, and as such is an alienable part of the EU's values. However, if an outsider asks by what mechanisms the EU enforces this provision, it turns out to be that we can basically cite good practices in the member states as examples, and only very few good practices at the level of the European Union itself. So while there is an EU-level principle, there are no EU-level mechanisms directly enforcing this important principle. Having said that, it should be noted that there are mechanisms at the EU level that indirectly enforce the EU's commitment to minority protection. One such mechanism is the European Citizens Initiative. We have discussed this, under which at least 1 million EU citizens from at least 7 member states can initiate legislation on any subject falling within the EU's competences. It has now become clear, as the EU Court of Justice has ruled, that such an initiative could be launched in the field of minority protection, among other things, and there are such initiatives. Unfortunately, none of them have yet reached their goal, in the sense that the request formulated in them, or at least part of it, has become a practice. In this respect, the EU still has room for improvement, and I would like to encourage FUEN and all of you who are members of FUEN and supporting the initiative, that we shouldn't give up this very noble strategic goal. But I would also draw your attention to the enlargement policy. The Minority Action Plan, which I have referred to, vis-à-vis Serbia, vis-à-vis the Ukraine, are also extremely important instruments. Or what I mentioned concerning the coming closer and closer between the Council of Europe and the European Union is an important process, and we ask you to support it, because then the Council of Europe's convention system might be integrated into the EU law. Nevertheless, it is worth considering, and perhaps the parliamentary circle is the most appropriate place for this, that direct minority protection mechanisms could be developed within the framework of the current division of competences in the EU. Since our panel deals with the minority policy aspects of heritage protection, cultural heritage protection, let me propose such a direct mechanism in this field as an experiment. Let's consider, what if 3 parties could jointly apply for European Union funding for a cultural heritage protection project related to the culture of a national minority, for example, monument protection or intangible cultural heritage, which also as important part of cultural heritage, like the tangible element of cultural heritage. For example, a civil society organization of a national minority living in an EU member state or affiliated with an EU member kin state, in other words, a mother country, as we say in Hungarian, but living outside the European Union, and a state or regional body of the country in whose territory the given minority lives, and together with them the state region that can be considered the kin state of the given minority. It would be an interesting model if the parliaments of the member states proposed the establishment of such a mechanism to the European Commission, that 3 different players from different geographical backgrounds could join their efforts into this aim. This mechanism would fit perfectly with the EU's support and coordination powers. At the same time, it would promote that minorities do not turn against each other, but encourage cooperation among the countries of Europe and the world. Finally, this is, I believe, the goal of all minority protection efforts, that the rights of people belonging to national and ethnic minorities should be an issue that is not surrounded by an aura of tension, but that explicitly encourages cooperation between member states, between the EU and other countries in the world, in order to preserve the minority culture, which is so valuable to all of us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen, elnök úr, a előadását.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, for your speech.
Tisztelettel felkérem Javier,
And may I now kindly invite Mr. Javier Maroto,
hogy tartsa meg
Vice President of the Spanish Senate, to deliver his address.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Javier Maroto. I am the Deputy Speaker of the Senate of Spain and a member of the center-right party in my country. Firstly, I would like to highlight some of the words given by Mr. Nemeth. I really appreciate that he introduced the issue about the situation in Ukraine. I thought that we all have in our countries a new minority, and it's all the Ukrainian refugees in our countries. Let me tell you something I learned only some months ago. We can say here in Europe that what Putin is doing in Ukraine is an illegal invasion of a country. But I should tell you that we are a minority saying that. Only the NATO countries are explaining the situation this way, an illegal invasion of an autocracy against a democracy. We are the only ones. I remember visiting the Parliamentary Assembly of the G20 just a few months ago, and I remember when the President of the Duma entered the hall. And I was shocked because everybody was taking pictures with her and everybody was shaking hands with her. I didn't expect that. And only when we Europeans explain what is happening in Ukraine, when we said it is an illegal invasion of a country to another, the President of the Duma, the President of the Parliament in Russia, asked for the floor and said, what all these Europeans are saying is a bullshit. They want your money for buying weapons to kill their own women and babies. I was shocked, but I was really shocked when she received a very great round of applause from all the countries except Europe. I'm talking about Indonesia, Egypt, Mexico, India, whatever. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are the minority explaining the situation in Ukraine. That's why we have refugees in our countries. The young minority in a big minority, the European Union and the NATO member countries. Well, thank you, Mr. Nemeth, for introducing the issue. Now I'm going to explain what's happening in my country with other minorities. Spain is undoubtedly one of the most advanced countries within the European Union in terms of social rights and the protection of minorities, but all of the minorities. For example, the right to use co-official languages is protected. These co-official languages, which exist in addition to Spanish, in some regions. For example, in Galicia, both Galician and Spanish can be spoken. In the Basque Country area, when I was born, in the north part of Spain, by the way, the Basque Country is Spain, they speak Basque and Spanish, both of them. And in Catalonia, Catalan and Spanish can be spoken. So this right extends to being educated in school or being attended to in public administration in both co-official languages. These rights are of using these languages by these regional minorities is protected by law. Unfortunately, pro-independence parties in these Spanish regions sometimes try to exclude Spanish and those who speak it. This happens especially when those governing Spain allow it and make deals with them to maintain power. This is currently happening with the Prime Minister of Spain, who is granting concessions to these pro-independence parties. The reason being, after losing the elections, he needed their votes to be elected Prime Minister and thus prevent the party that actually won the elections from governing. The pro-independence parties are always trying to explain that citizens who live in Catalonia and feel Spanish are a minority. Well, colleagues, this is truly false and part of the pro-independence propaganda. The majority of the Catalonians live happily in Catalonia as one of the regions of Spain, so they feel as happily Spanish as someone living in Seville or Madrid. In any case, both the protection of the use of co-official languages in these regions on one hand and the territorial integrity of Spain are both protected within our Constitution. Okay, let's talk another minority. The right to be different, he said, Mr. Nemeth. I completely agree. The second example I want to present is the respect for different sexual orientations that exist in Spain in favor of equality of rights and duties for all. In Spain, same-sex marriage is as normal in law as it is among citizens. Businesses and public administrations approve plans and initiatives to prevent any discrimination based on sexual orientation. Unfortunately, the situation of freedom and equality for all people, regardless of their sexual orientation, does not occur equally in all countries of the European Union. If we want to protect all minorities, we must also move forward together here. It is perfectly compatible to protect children from certain educational contents if that contents are really inappropriate for their age, while allowing two adult men or two adult women to exercise same-sex marriage. I really hope that this issue would stop being a topic of debate regarding minority protection in Europe very soon. Finally, I want to highlight the reality faced by another minority in my country, and I think in your countries as well, the Jewish population. After the cruel and unfair terrorist attack on October the 7th against Israel, we are seeing how hatred towards Israel is once again transforming into anti-Semitism in Europe. Possibly Madrid is the best city in the world to live freely because no one asks you where are you from or who do you pray to or who do you love. But also, like in other cities across Europe, there are attacks against the Jewish population, even though Jews are a very small part of the Spanish population. Dear colleagues, the national police in my country often have to protect Jewish schools and synagogues. Some extremists honk at them and raise their hands, pointing their thumbs down. Sometimes it gets much worse. Graffiti appears on cars or establishments, or eggs are thrown at their private homes, or even stones. So all these atrocious acts never appear in the news or government statements. They are Spaniards, and as Jews, they need protection on a regular basis. It is not normal. There is no other church that needs police protection. Sometimes absurd situations arise. A few weeks ago, there were demonstrators shouting "Free Palestine" in front of the Royal Theatre in Madrid. The reason? It turns out that one of the musicians performing the opera of that day was a Jew, an American Jew. It is ridiculous. It would be laughable if the issue went so serious. So, dear colleagues, it is important to write about it, explain it, and denounce it without remaining silent. We must do it without fear of the truth, even if we are the ones occasionally in the minority. Thank you very much.
Köszönjük szépen
Thank you very much
előadását, köszönjük szépen.
for your presentation, Mr. Vice President. Thank you for calling our attention to so many issues and problems. And I would like to call your attention to a very interesting fact. The national football team of Israel plays all its matches here in Budapest
Otthon nem tud otthont adni.
because they cannot provide a venue for those in Israel. And this means, and tells a lot, that in Hungary there are no anti-Semitic movements. Hungary remains a peaceful and secure country. Distinguished guests, may I kindly invite Elvira Kovács, Vice President of the National Assembly of Serbia, to deliver her address. The floor is yours.
Köszönöm szépen, levezető elnök úr.
Thank you very much, Acting Chair. Mr. Speaker,
Ladies and gentlemen, coming back to the rights of national minorities, protecting the rights of national minorities and the importance of cultural heritage, in my address, my aim would be, or that's my plan, to analyze the conference topic highlighted in this panel from the perspective of both, since I was introduced as Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia. So from one point, of course, from Serbia's view, highlighting the good example which was already mentioned by Németh Zsolt. Actually, after Zsolt's speech, I'm not sure what should I speak about now. So I will not focus on the Minority Action Plan, but mostly on the National Minority Councils. So I would try to have two focuses as a Deputy Speaker, and since our distinguished President of PACE is here, and I have been a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe for 17 years, also from a perspective as a member of PACE. I would really like to summarize all of my political, that through all of my political experience, I taught few important things. I think the most important are when we speak about the political field of minority issues. The most important is to ensure standards enshrined in the international conventions to be effectively incorporated into domestic legislation and given effect in practice. It goes without any saying that minority rights are at the heart of the Council of Europe values. And as we witnessed, for many times over the last 75 years, those who have been faced, those values have been faced new realities of the increasingly diverse societies. There is no need to stress that comparing to any standards, the country which I am representing and from where I come from, its society, the Serbian society, is diverse. It is home to more than 20 recognized national and linguistic communities. which make up almost 1/8 of the whole population. According to the last census from 2022, Hungarians made up 2.77% of the whole population of Serbia. According to the last, freshest numbers, there are more than 184,000 Hungarians living in Serbia. I believe that we all agree, regardless the number of Hungarians living in Serbia, that the defining element of the integrated society is not the sameness of its citizens, but their shared sense of belonging. In that sense, since the political changes in 2000, representatives of autochthonous national communities, especially Hungarians, have played an important role in the Serbian political arena, actively participating on the issues of human rights and European integration. Even more, according to different international reports, as well as theoretical analyses, the Serbian policy is very much driven by the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, and in that sense, considering the European level, I will dare to say that Serbia is a model of protecting and advancing politics of minority rights, despite the fact that we still have no idea when Serbia can join the EU. With 24 minority national councils formed as a constitutional institution of minority self-government, aimed to exercise the, Mr. Kalmar is not here at the moment, but he would be happy that I would like to focus on collective, so not only individual, but collective rights of national minorities in the fields of culture, education, information, and official use of languages and scripts, and which have by law a specific public mandate to participate in decision-making and may decide independently on certain issues. Serbia, regardless of the fact that is, as I mentioned, still not an EU member, serves as an excellent example that many EU members can follow. Nevertheless, the participation of minorities in decision-making processes is of crucial importance. But we must not ignore that an outstanding tool for dialogue and social inclusion is a protection of the cultural heritage. Let me use this opportunity to remind that although cultural heritage of minorities and their contribution is recognized within the Council of Europe and also the European Union, such recognition falls short when we come to the protection of cultural heritage of the autochthonous national and linguistic communities. Therefore, I strongly believe that it is time to pose the question of adequacy of the standards of non-discrimination, recognition, and protection that are proved to be inadequate to address important issues of autochthonous minorities. Cultural heritage control, as well as the question of guaranteeing their effective participation, as I mentioned, in the development of and decision-making in their cultural heritage. So the concrete example, intangible cultural heritage within the EU member states are somewhat protected by European minority rights instruments, but the tangible cultural heritage of minorities is very much in the control of the state. In Serbia, besides the councils of, which I already mentioned, of the Hungarian national minority, the Bosniak National Council has initiated procedure for determining the status of cultural assets of special importance for the national minority, with the aim of protecting tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Back in 2012, the National Council of the Hungarian national minority made a decision to identify not less than 140 tangible and intangible cultural assets of special importance for the national minority. The examination of the rights of autochthonous national minorities, as I mentioned, our Parliamentary Assembly, falls within the competence of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination of the PACE. Together, in cooperation with all representatives who are sensitive to the situation of national minorities, this committee uses the tools and opportunities offered by the Council of Europe to exploit the values inherent in national communities and to preserve diversity. Therefore, I think it is extremely important to continue our work and really to focus what we can do all together. Sometimes I say that as a representative of a Hungarian minority, but of course the part of Serbian delegation, with other colleagues from different delegations, we will do our best in the competences of our committee and of course the whole Council of Europe. But before I close my intervention, allow me to mention, since I was really trying to focus on national minority councils and be a little bit not so modest. So the first time when the national minority councils were introduced officially, so the first law was adopted, it was 2009 in Serbia, but even before that, back in 1999, we already had our national minority councils. Hungarian community, precisely the Alliance of Vojvodina Hungarians, was the, I would say, a forerunner of the institutional protection of minority rights in Serbia, and as early as in 1999, symbolically on 20th August, 46 members of the Provisional National Councils were elected in Subotica, which included that time our federal, republic, and provincial deputies, as well as councillors in municipalities where Hungarians were the majority. And as I mentioned, national minority councils were first introduced into the Serbian legal order back in, so the law was adopted in 2009, but even before that, in 2002, law on the protection of rights and freedoms of national minorities. And the first law on national councils, which were a few times changed, and which we are implementing. And really, as I mentioned, Serbia has officially recognized more than 20 minorities, 24 national minority councils, and the Jewish one, so more than 20. I think it proves our richness, and it is extremely important that all of these national minority councils and people which are active in them can have their say in their rights, but of course the cooperation between them and the state is extremely important. Thank you for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen alelnök asszony előadását, és most lehetőség van a hozzászólásokra. Az előzetes jelentkezés alapján 12 felszólalási igény érkezett. A felszólalókat arra szeretném kérni, hogy mindenki a saját helyéről beszéljen.
We now have arrived at the point when we open the floor for questions. 12 applications have been received. I am kindly asking you to remain at your seats and use your microphone. And I'm asking you to use a normal rhythm for the sake of our interpreters. No need to press any buttons. The microphones will switch on automatically. And you have 2.5 minutes, that is 150 seconds for your contributions, and I am asking for your understanding, but at 2.5 minutes I will give you a very discreet signal like this. So opening the floor now, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Federico Mollicone, representing the Chamber of Deputies of the Italian Parliament.
Il mio ringraziamento al Parlamento ungherese per l'invito a questa importante iniziativa.
I would like to thank the Hungarian Parliament for inviting us to this very important initiative and for putting at the center of the Presidency's European table the relationship between cultural heritage that I will be talking about and the minorities on which my colleagues in the Italian delegation will be speaking, well represented by the beautiful photographic exhibition at yesterday's Geofolk at the opening session. I am thinking in particular of the appreciation and respect for folk traditions that intersect with local ones. Various and complex historical events have led over the centuries to the settlement on the territory of the Italian state of numerous minority communities, diverse in language, cultural traditions, and socio-economic conditions. The minority language communities present in Italy traditionally live in the following areas: in the border regions where they share a common culture and language with the people on the other side of the border, Valle d'Aosta, German-speaking Ladin or Slovenia. The areas of their traditional settlements enjoy various levels of administrative autonomy, and these minorities enjoy different forms of protection. Other historical communities are dispersed throughout the territory, like Aberes, Greek Franco-Provençal, Catalan, Croatian, Occitan. Their protection appears difficult due to small numbers dispersed throughout the territory. All of these are echoed in the representation of intangible heritage, which we can consider in its own right as cultural heritage. On this, Italy proposes a very recent case study that has just been approved in Act 152. In this sense, the law provides for the valorization of historical reenactments as factors of development, a qualifying element of the country and its historical, artistic and cultural heritage. The awareness of historical reenactment events at the national level and at the European and international levels in implementation of the principles established by Article 167 of the Treaty on the Function of the European Union, which provides that the European Union contributes to the full development of cultures of the member states while respecting their national and regional diversity, and by the Faro Convention for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. Financial support for historical reenactment bodies and the implementation of related events through the fund that the Italian state has financed by 4 million a year. The development of cultural tourism Thank you very much, Mr. President. The technology took away your sound after 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much nonetheless for your contribution. And now may I pass the floor to Mr. Jorge Galvez, the Deputy Speaker of the Portuguese Parliament, to deliver his address. Thank you very much. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to participate in this parliamentary conference, or interparliamentary conference on cultural heritage and identity of national communication. Cultural heritage actually plays a central role in preserving the identity of national communities in Europe. Obviously, these minorities are incorporated in the joint history of the continent and in sharing values that have accompanied various civilizations. It's very important to differentiate between traditional national minorities whose authentic contributions to their identities and which could provide from, or we have to differentiate them from, the mass immigration that can cause detrimental impacts. Those arriving of late will not understand the cultural and spiritual standing points, and they resist any attempts made at their integration. Their commitment and the commitment in relation to traditional minorities plays an integrating role, and we must not allow external events or cohesions to impact these. I can reinforce in the name of Portugal our commitment to the protection of this joint heritage. And this conference, I believe, will constitute a turning point for every country and will result in a strong continent in Europe.
Köszönjük szépen, alelnök.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. Once again, I would like to apologize to Mr. Federico Morricone that the microphone was taken away. There will be an opportunity to renew any contributions after the podium discussion, but the technology is set in a way that after 2.5 minutes, there's 15 seconds remaining. So please try to keep that in mind, but there will be another session when you can make further contributions. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And now the floor goes to Vesna Bedekovic, Vice Chair of a committee of the Parliament of Croatia.
Igen, köszönöm szépen. Az időt azt kérném szépen visszaállítani.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you to reset the time.
Thank you so much. Honorable Chairman, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the government of the Republic of Croatia pays special attention respecting the rights and freedoms of members of national minorities, as well as the rights guaranteed by the Constitution of the Republic of Croatia and other laws. The policy of protecting the rights of national minorities is implemented in cooperation with representatives of national minorities and their representatives in the Croatian parliaments. In order to preserve, develop and promote their own cultural identity, members of national minorities in Croatia can establish museums, libraries, publishing and cultural institutions and associations. And associations and institutions of national minorities are financed from the state budget by the Council of National Minorities, Ministry of Culture and Media, and for human rights and the rights of national minorities. When we talk about Hungarian national minority in Republic of Croatia allocates funds to Hungarian national minority associations for the programs in the field of information, publishing, cultural amateurism, and also cultural manifestations. Certainly, I would like to emphasize that in 1995, the Republic of Croatia signed a bilateral agreement with Hungary on the protection of the rights of national minorities. And regarding cultural cooperation, the 6th cultural cooperation program between Hungary and Croatia for the period from 2023 to 2026 was signed here in Budapest in November last year. And my time is up. Thank you so much for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen, elnök asszony. Jasmina Opec, Vörös asszony.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Next is Jasmina Opec, Madam Speaker, from the Upper House.
Of national minorities offers a valuable opportunity to address various societal challenges, such as demographic change. In many parts of Europe, national minorities reside in rural and remote areas which are experiencing population decline and aging. I came from Slovenia, specifically from Prekmurje, a region home to the Hungarian minority, and it faces these demographic challenges. The cultural heritage of national minorities can play an important role in shaping effective demographic policies. Promoting and nurturing the cultural heritage of national minorities can strengthen the sense of belonging within these communities, helping to curb emigration, especially among young people. The sense of identity and pride can also serve as a catalyst for the broader development of the region where these minorities reside. Cultural heritage can open the door to new economic opportunity, foster business connection across borders, enhance tourism, and offer added value to the local economy. It can become an attractive element for visitors from other regions, further boosting economic and social growth. Given the far-reaching impact of cultural heritage on society, it is crucial that we proactively protect, promote, and develop the cultural heritage of national minorities to ensure its continued contribution to both local and broader societal well-being. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Andrea Wiesbeek.
Thank you very much, Andrea Wiesbeek, representing the Upper House Committee from the Dutch Parliament. The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrea van Langen, and I'm a member of the Netherlands Parliament. Today, it is Sinterklaas, an important cultural tradition in the Netherlands, mainly for the children who get a lot of presents. But unfortunately, there are also concerns. The geopolitical tension in and outside Europe also cause tension for national minorities, who are always more vulnerable in times of tension. Where the Netherlands, and mainly Amsterdam, was always known as a beacon of tolerance, it's now a great challenge to give the different minorities the feeling that they are welcome, and that diversity has always been the power of this city and forms the basis of our current prosperity. The European community in Brussels provides the European Heritage Label to important European heritage sites. Now 48 buildings and places have this label as recognition for the role they played in our European history, culture, or integration. The label has a strong educative value for our youth especially. They get a better picture of the background of this symbolic location. In Holland, Kamp Westerbork and the Peace Palace in The Hague got this recognition and show us how important it is to protect and cherish traditional minorities. There are different groups of people that play their role in Dutch society. Think of minorities with a Turkish, Moroccan, Suriname, Antillean or Jewish background, but also Roma and Sinti, and since the war, Ukrainians. In the Netherlands, only the Frisian people are recognized as a traditional minority. I myself, I'm born in Friesland, and the Frisian culture is characterized by a strong regional identity that's based for an important part on the Frisian language. This language is known as an official language in the Netherlands and is nowadays spoken by some 400,000 people. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Jorge Busadé úr az Európai
Thank you very much, Jorge Busadé, representing the European Parliament. You have the floor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on national minorities, and thank you to the Hungarian presidency for raising this issue, which is a very important issue. I openly support politically as well the protection of the rights of Hungarian minorities beyond Hungary's borders. So irrespective of where they happen to live within the European Union, I stand up for the enforcement and implementation of the rights of Hungarian national minorities. In Spain, we have a decentralized state. We have separatist minorities that do not recognize the constitution and are acting in violation of the rights of the majority Spanish-speaking society. So separatist linguistic restrictions are on their agenda, and they are taking action in public institutions against the Spanish minority. So it's very important to highlight that there are countries where we are suffering from a situation that is otherwise a threat against all of us, namely that linguistic, cultural, and minority values are being attempted to be imposed on us. And I'm talking of Muslim values. So the political and cultural proliferation of Islam is appearing in a religious gown, so to say, and these efforts must be rejected. We live in a Christian continent, and that is Europe. So it is my firm position that we must openly stand up against any attempts of other groups wishing to impose these values on us in conflict with our own Christian values. So we must not succumb to these efforts. We have our own cultural heritage, and our women enjoy a favorable position in our culture, and we must refute any ambitions to impose these values on us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Representative Pericles Mantas, member of the Committee of the Hellenic Parliament.
I take this opportunity to express our views on the matters at hand, because the aspects of cultural heritage and the protection of minority rights are not only fundamental to our identity, they also form the principles of justice and of equality that we hold dear and around which our societies have been built. Greece, with its rich history, stands as a beacon of cultural heritage. We are home to 19 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and we boast a variety of museums and archaeological sites. We celebrate our rich culture through various festivals and traditions, and we regard its protection as a collective responsibility. It is this aspect of preservation that ensures that our culture, our folklore, our music, our way of life stands successfully the test of time. Equally important to the cultural heritage is the protection of minority rights. Greece is home to a diverse population, including religious and linguistic minorities, but not ethnic ones. The protection of these groups is essential for fostering a just and inclusive society, but it is also a complex issue, influenced by historical, social, and political factors. As a member state of the European Union and the Council of Europe, we are bound by international treaties and the European Convention of Human Rights. It is these treaties that provide the necessary framework for the protection of minority rights. However, challenges remain, such as the full integration of the Roma minority into Greek society, as well as dealing with the migrant and refugee crisis. Addressing these issues requires a multi-level approach. We need to battle discrimination and social exclusion, but we also require respect for the customs, the religion, the rule of law, and the way of life that are in place already. These goals are equally important, and they often intertwine. We need to work together to ensure that our heritage continues to inspire, and at the same time make sure that the rights of all individuals are respected, while safeguarding the core values and traditions that define our modern European societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Madam Domenica Spinelli has the floor next. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the Hungarian presidency and the parliament that is hosting us for soliciting reflection on a topic that is particularly significant at this juncture in the life of the European Union. The issue of national minorities is deeply connected with the defense of the millenary identity of European peoples and nations that, in their specificity and diversity, make up the great historical, legal, and cultural heritage of Europe. I believe that, in fact, a new climate, a new awareness is emerging in Europe on the actions to be taken to strengthen the European Union, leave the decisions and actions closest to the lives of its citizens to the states, and focus European policies on the major strategic issues of our time, which require a common effort defense, security of external borders, regulation of the migration phenomenon, the single market, energy competitiveness. As far as protection of national minorities and their cultural and linguistic heritage is concerned, these must be guaranteed as a priority by the nation-states. However, the Union has a fundamental role in compliance with the treaties in preserving and enhancing national and regional diversities while highlighting their common cultural heritage. Indeed, the European Parliament has repeatedly emphasized in its guidelines the importance of establishing a common framework of minimum standards at European level, guaranteed by a system for monitoring the policies undertaken. The policies of the nation-states and the intervention of the Union should be directed towards certain objectives, which I consider strategic for the implementation of the protection of national minorities, to emphasize the importance of their protection not only as a pivotal element of the international human rights protection system, but also as an essential component in maintaining security and peace in Europe. We must strengthen policies for the preservation and dissemination of the history and culture of the European peoples, targeting them at educational institutions and the media in order to raise awareness among young people. The government of Giorgia Meloni is now making efforts in order to ensure its central role in this significant change. Thank you. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Mr. Jan Riese from the Swedish Parliament. The floor is yours.
As said, from the Swedish Parliament, a Green Party member. More importantly, right now, I'm a member of the Committee on the Constitution in Sweden, which with my colleagues here. It is today 25 years ago that we got the law for minorities in Sweden. In 1999, we have 5 of them. It's the Sami people, it's the Torni people, it's the Swedish Finns, the Jews and the Romans. And part of that agreement 25 years ago was a commitment to education and development, I should say, concerning language and cultural heritage for all these, for all the minorities. And I would like to use the Sami people as my example today. There's no ranking in this, but there are some important aspects that I want to raise. The Sami people is, by the way, the only indigenous people in Sweden and actually in Europe, I think. They have their own parliament in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and a number of languages that are used. Many of the questions that you may have heard about is about the land use, about the reindeer husbandry in our 3 countries, but I would like to talk a little bit about the language, because as evidence mounts up, we know that language, the use of a second or a first language is becoming more important. There's a growing interest in this as well from young people and older people in the minorities, not only the Sami ones. So we think that's important, and we think this leads me to a couple of points that I want to finish with, that it is a bit unfortunate when long-term funding and long-term commitments to these kinds of protection of national minorities' rights are being jeopardized by electoral cycles and political disagreements. So I'm really hoping that we can find ways to, not least with the help of the European Union and the European collaboration, find ways to bring this to a somewhat more long-term commitment and stability when it comes to education in language training and development of languages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member of Parliament. Next up is Ioannis Sarakiotis. Mr. Ioannis Sarakiotis from the Hellenic Parliament.
We had the 70th anniversary of the Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Heritage, and the current conference comes to contribute to the overall debate on this critical issue. Greece has consistently pursued a policy and taken action for the well-being of the religious minority in Thrace, the sole minority recognized by the Greek constitution. The Greek state has systematically adopted advantageous measures to the benefit of the about 120,000 Greek citizens being members of the Muslim minority, promoting and enhancing their integration in the wider society and protecting their rights without any discrimination. In the religious domain, there are more than 240 operative mosques in Thrace, which is the highest ratio of mosques per citizen of Islamic faith in Europe. Furthermore, religious education of the members of the Muslim minority is provided by 86 minority primary schools and 2 secondary level schools, all funded by the Greek state. Respectively, the Greek state has adopted several measures to the benefit of the minority members, such as preferential quotas for admission to the Greek universities, as well as the civil service. Another issue of major importance for Greece refers to the effective protection of the rights of the indigenous Greek national minority in North Epirus by Albania, while it is worth to be reminded that this is also part of Albania's obligations as an EU candidate country. The adjustment of school textbooks content, the avoidance of negative stereotypes in media, the protection of the right of education in the minority language, and the need for adoption of secondary legislation on self-identification represent only few of the steps Albania must take towards its Europeanization. Besides, the integration of the Western Balkans is regarded as one of the core strategic aims of the EU, and for this reason, the Union has to contribute constructively to the solution of any such problems. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen.
Thank you very much. Nicoletta Spelgati is next up, representing the Italian Senate.
Grazie. Desidero ringraziare la Presidenza ungherese e il Parlamento che ci ospita per l'importanza del tema
Nagyon szépen köszönöm.
dibattito che ne è scaturito. Sebbene i primi trattati della Comunità Europea non menzionassero i diritti delle minoranze nazionali, si sta sempre di più nel tempo affermando un concetto articolato di diversità culturale europea. Il Comitato delle Regioni, istituito col Trattato di Maastricht, ha valorizzato le diversità culturali e linguistiche europee. Gli stessi Stati europei, che ad uno sguardo superficiale potrebbero essere considerati piuttosto omogenei per quanto riguarda culture e lingue, in realtà sono continuamente attraversati da lingue e tradizioni diverse. Su 500 milioni di abitanti dell'Unione Europea, coloro che hanno come madrelingua una lingua diversa a quella nazionale sono più di 40 milioni. L'identità di un popolo è radicata nella sua cultura, nelle sue tradizioni, nella sua religione e anche nella sua lingua. Affinché un popolo possa continuare ad avere una sua identità è necessario curare le sue radici. Questo rappresenta il faro di un progetto serio di rinascita dell'anima dell'Europa, troppo spesso trascurata in nome di politiche unioniste che mirano soltanto ed esclusivamente a far funzionare questa struttura sovranazionale. L'identità europea risiede proprio nel rispetto delle differenze che caratterizzano i vari popoli che la compongono. Voglio soffermarmi sull'esperienza italiana, anche perché sono senatrice in rappresentanza della Valle d'Aosta, che è stata la prima regione italiana a fruire di un regime di autonomia speciale. La Repubblica Italiana ha saputo coniugare la tutela delle minoranze linguistiche e culturali, sia nel quadro costituzionale dei diritti e dei principi fondamentali, sia attraverso il riconoscimento delle specificità regionali. Il presupposto fondante delle autonomie speciali è stato proprio quello di preservare i valori storici, culturali e tradizionali di quei territori e di quelle popolazioni.
So it fundamentally serves the purposes of maintaining the traditional cultural values of the people living in that area. But economic and institutional criteria must also be strengthened. All this is the result of the autonomy model that is adopted under our constitution. So autonomy provides provides good conditions for the protection of national minorities and promotes linguistic pluralism. In Italy, the current government wishes to provide an impetus to provincial autonomy so that it will meet the requirements of the local population. And the differentiated autonomy was recently approved, which provides for the opportunity of various autonomy opportunities for the local populations while providing for the recognition of a balance with all the other various organizations. So now I would like to ask the members of this bloc, that is Zsolt Németh, Javier Marono, and Elvira Kovács, I would like to ask them if they wish to respond. If yes, they will get the floor. And let me ask Zsolt Németh, President, to proceed here to the speaker's point, and the time frame is the same, 2 to 2.5 minutes, so technically speaking, this is what we can make available to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair of the Committee, of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Hungarian National Assembly. So you have the floor.
Colleagues, I was very impressed by the multitude of your contributions. First of all, I would like to underline that we are here discussing the issue of traditional national minorities. And I believe that we need to maintain our focus. It is not the migrant communities, they are not the racial minorities, they are not the gender minorities, they are not the sexual minorities, but they are the historical, traditional national minorities, and we need to maintain our commitment to the special protection of the traditional national minorities. Secondly, I would like to reiterate that there are really tremendous positive examples, and the positive examples are constantly developing. But here it seems to me, as from the last Italian contribution we could hear, that the cultural and regional administrative autonomy seems to be one of the strongest defender of historical traditional national minorities. I would also like to underline the discussion which related the European Union Citizens Initiative. We are going to confront not just the implementation of the Minority Safe Pack, but we are also awaiting new initiative, the so-called Cohesion Citizens Initiative, which is coming into the table of the European Union, hopefully in the coming month. As far as the accent on the language, our Swedish colleague was underlying, here I think the role of the language charter and the possible cooperation between the Council of Europe and the European Union is fundamentally important. How to build this bridge will require, I think, our utmost attention. Concerning the Greek colleague which was speaking about the Albanian Greek community situation, the enlargement policy, as I have developed, is an example where we can collaborate in the future along the lines of the Minority Action Plan, which has been developed in relation to Serbia and the Ukraine, and I am convinced that in the future, enlargement policy can build on the practice of the Minority Action Plan. And finally, I am very glad that many of you have responded to the cultural heritage dimension. We believe that the cultural heritage dimension is also a field where we can concentrate our efforts, and we can find out what kind of ways and means exist. I have just put one example on the table, the direct funding of minority-related cultural heritage by the European Commission, but I am convinced that there is a multitude of possibilities we might rely on. So I would like to thank you very much for your contributions and hope to continue our collaboration with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. And now I turn to Mr. Javier Maroto. Do you wish to respond to anything you have heard? If so, then please come up to the pulpit. Mr. Vice President, the floor is yours.
Chairman, we hear a lot of examples of traditional minorities in Europe here, and I'm completely sure there is a lot of other traditional minorities that has not been explained in this room this morning because it's impossible to explain all of them. Fortunately, Europe is one of the most diverse continents in the earth, and we are a lot of people sharing the continent with different styles of life, with different traditions and different languages and so on. So I completely agree with all the examples given this morning. I'm a Spaniard, so as you already know, Spain is one of the first countries existing. It was in 1492 when Spain was created. So as a big country and a very old country, we know a lot about what is diversity in a big territory, and respecting traditions and respecting cultural heritages. Because it's a big country where we have big cities, but also very, very small villages in the center part of Spain. We have the green areas in the north part of Spain, and also the warmest beaches around the Mediterranean coast. We have the only European country with territory inside Europe and also in Africa, because we have two cities belonging to Spain in Africa, as you already know, Ceuta and Melilla. And of course we know what is tradition and diversity, because we have not only the peninsular territory, but also the islands, and the very far islands as the Canary Islands. What I mean is that we know how to coexist, respecting the different traditions and different cultural heritage in our country. And I completely agree with some words given here, that the only threat that we should take into account is what is happening with some pro-independence parties in some countries that are trying to give a false impression of what reality is. Yeah? So if you hear sometimes in the European Parliament or to some colleagues that Catalonia should be a different country, or the Basque country should be a different country, this is not about respecting traditions. This is fighting the Constitution of Spain. So some politicians are creating trouble around Europe saying this kind of fairy tales, because you can get your objectives if you change previously the law. This is the first lesson we all parliamentarians have when we start in politics, don't we? So it's a real threat that we are living in some part of Europe. As a man born in the Basque country, I can tell you that I perfectly know what I'm talking about. I was surrounded by bodyguards 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because I was the mayor of a capital city in the Basque country, and you know what happened, what was happened there with a terrorist band shooting people who don't believe the way they think. They think that they should be separated to Spain, so if you don't think so, you were killed. Imagine this. I'm not talking about respecting traditional values. I'm talking about respecting human life, human rights. I agree with Mr. Nemeth in one point. We should focus on traditional minorities. I've introduced other minorities. I know this is not a topic, but I think that we in Europe, we can't live without talking about all of them. But focusing on traditional minorities, There is only one point I would like to discuss, and it's globalization. Globalization is another threat for minorities. Well, maybe not only minorities, but the whole continent. And one of the reasons why this is happening, and one of the new aspects globalization is bringing, is migration. So I think we Europeans need migrants to arrive to Europe if we want them to work, if we want them to pay taxes, and if we want them to pay our pensions. So I don't think we should ask, where are you from? So if you are coming from a particular country, I disagree. If you're coming from another one, I agree. So I don't care if you're coming from Morocco, Algeria, or the United States. The question is, are you coming to my country for work? If it's yes, I'm okay. If it's not, I'm not okay. Are you respecting the law of my country? If it's yes, I'm okay. If it's not, I'm not okay. Are you respecting all the traditions and cultural life of the different countries you are arriving? If it's yes, I'm okay. If it's not, we shouldn't be okay. But it doesn't matter the color of your skin or the guy you're praying to. We should think longer. And ladies and gentlemen, we need migrants working in Europe, but we should do that in a very, very serious way. So talking about migration is not leaving the focus of traditional minorities, because it's merging, everything is connected. And I think that the richness of Europe is all these traditions. You can find specific recipes in every corner in Europe. That's fantastic, wonderful. Globalization can kill the recipes and traditions all around Europe. We are not equals in this fundamental traditional specialities and dancing and languages, all of these things. So, but migration, I'm finishing. Migration is an issue related to cultural heritage, because they are merging with us. So we should ask, which kind of merging do we want? And I think we should discuss the issue in this way, precisely in this way, and not another one. Well, I'm running out of time. I really appreciate the invitation, and I hope we can continue discussing all these issues. The longer, the better. Thank you so much.
Köszönjük, alelnök úr.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Elvira Kovácsú wishes to respond, representing the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia in her capacity as Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, you have the floor.
So once again, this panel is about national minorities, autochthonous, or we would say traditional national minorities. I think that the European Union and other EU member states and others are dealing enough with sexual and other minorities. But we, as 8% of people living in Europe, 40 to 50 million people, deserve to have our rights. As someone who is here more or less representing PACE and Council of Europe, I fully agree that human rights are important. But the rights to identity and cultural heritage of national minorities are also human rights. And please do not open the theme of migration here. Or please be free and come to the Hungarian and Serbian border. Luckily, today it's much easier thanks to the clever politics of Mr. Orban and Hungary, and also that Serbia figured out, come to the Balkan route and see those brilliant migrants you are speaking about. We do not need human trafficking here. But coming back, dear colleagues, we all have to, thank you for your interventions, we all have to work together So to explain to the European Union also that when we speak about minorities, these are not only Roma, but traditional, different in different countries. It starts with the kids you are teaching to think and speak and read and preserve the language which are used or spoken by a smaller number of people, to fighting through politics and other workshops to save, for example, teaching of languages like in Serbia with 5 pupils in classes. And then I think that we are all sensitive to different minorities, but please, if we are finally trying to focus this, and hopefully, as it was said, that the next presidency could also think about this, focus on these people. Thank you for your attention.
Nagyon szépen köszönöm alelnök asszony reagálását.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker, for your response. We have now come to the end of this thematic session. I thank the contributors for their contributions, and I thank you all for your responses. In the next section, we will have a podium discussion, a most interesting one. We will listen to best practices concerning the policies on the protection of autochthonous communities in Europe. This, however, requires a short 5-minute technical transition, and therefore I am kindly asking for your patience for 5 minutes. And if possible, please do not leave the hall, because in 5 minutes we will continue with a podium discussion.
Azt hiszem, letelt az 5 perc. Kérek mindenkit foglalja el a helyét. Okay, we would like to continue our discussion. Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, milyen tisztelt elnök
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. Chair,
köszöntöm Önöket akkor a
may I extend my most heartfelt welcome to all of you, and
teljes feladat, hogy
it is my privileged task to
talán mondhatom azt, hogy az
act
párbeszédet
as host on this, or moderator on this last dialogue, if you like.
beszélgetésnek lesz.
Hopefully, we will be participants of a very exciting discussion. And allow me to extend my welcome here
Videszot professzor urat,
to Professor Videszot,
elsőként fogok megszólítani,
whom I will turn to first and foremost to tell us about the autonomy in South Tyrol. And with that, we will start our panel discussion, which fundamentally focuses on good practices, on the fact that in Europe, the national minorities, who amount to at least 10% of the population of the European Union, what good or best practices have been introduced in each country in relation to these minorities, and what the practice of minority rights means to them in these countries. The listing of this is important to us, but before I pass the floor on to Professor Videszot, allow me to introduce the other participants to the discussion, starting with Madame Malling, who is here in representation of the Sorb community in Saxony. Allow me also to introduce Mr. Juuso, who is the Vice Speaker of the Sami Parliament in Finland. Therefore, he can provide us with important information on how they experience their minority status. And I'd also like to introduce Ms. Erika Kisné-Köles, who is the Slovenian nationality spokesperson in the Hungarian Parliament and Vice Chair of the Hungarian Nationalities Committee. And last but not least, allow me to send my welcome to Mr. Lurinc Nacsa, State Secretary for National Policy. Mr. State Secretary, who has only fulfilled his position as such for a few weeks, and also will share some insights into the national Hungarian minorities living beyond our border. Not to abuse my role as a moderator, I would also like to share with you some information. Mr. Laurent Vince, MEP, has had a draft resolution which actually recommended that the Council of Europe national minority decisions should be adopted by the institutional system of the acquis of the European Union. And I consider it very important that the national minorities who live under that status in Europe also urge that to take place, since that would result in the fact that the European Union's legal system would include prerequisites which emerged in the debates yesterday and today, focusing on the fact that it is necessary for the European Union to assume responsibility for the national minorities that live in its territory. And I think of it as equal importance that if on March the 25th, 2019, the Parliament of Europe made a resolution according to which people of African descent and their rights were specified, in 5 pages, I don't see why there would be no opportunity to achieve what I previously talked about. And I believe that if the European institution system took itself seriously, then it could also reach such a resolution regarding or concerning national minorities as well, which would mean that it would not depend on the decisions of certain nation states or nations, but basically take into consideration the principle of subsidiarity. These people could become full-fledged citizens. So I would, with saying all that, give the floor to Professor Vidasot, but I have omitted one thing. I do apologize. I forgot to introduce myself. I am Katalin Sili, former Speaker of the House of the Hungarian National Assembly, and now as the Chief Counselor to the Prime Minister, I deal with national policy first and foremost. And after my introduction, and now that you know everyone who is sitting in the circle, I will give the floor to Professor for the length of 5 minutes. Actually, everyone will have an opportunity to deliver their speeches or presentations in 5 minutes. So the floor is now yours, Professor. Oh, and I will also give you a microphone.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this invitation to speak here to this high-level conference, which honors me greatly. In the 5 minutes at my disposal, I will try to give an insight into the situation of the minorities in the province of Bolzano or South Tyrol in Italy. At the same time, I will try to draw some conclusions about the lessons that, in my opinion, can be learned from the South Tyrolean experience for the protection of minorities at the European level. South Tyrol is the most northerly province in Italy. It is home of 2 autochthonous minorities, the Germans and the Ladins. According to the last census, in South Tyrol, there are about 320,000 Germans and 20,000 Ladins. While the German minority has been entirely united in the province of Bolzano since 1948, the small Ladin minority of altogether 32,000 people continues to be divided into 3 provinces and 2 regions. This division, that dates back to the fascist period, has a lasting weakening effect on the Ladin people. A first conclusion that I would like to draw is therefore that small minorities that settle in a compact territory within a state should, if possible, belong to the same administrative unit in order to avoid different measures of standards of protection. Of course, this unit should be the one where the protection standards are the highest. South Tyrol is often mentioned as a good example of how to solve a minority problem. This is due in particular to the second Statute of Autonomy, which was granted to the province in 1972 after a decade of negotiations at national and international level. South Tyrol's autonomy is a mix of a territorial and a cultural autonomy. Elements of the territorial autonomy are especially the 29 fields in which South Tyrol has primary competencies. That means that the province can act independently on a legislative level, of course respecting the national Italian constitution. Examples for such fields where South Tyrol has primary competences are civil protection, regional planning, nature and landscape protection, subsidized housing, vocational training, skilled crafts, social services, public transport, road construction, or the management of agriculture and tourism. These key sectors have proven over the decades to be crucial for the development of a strong and crisis-resistant local economy. They allow to steer regional development in the direction of minority protection combined with economy, prosperity, and social security. The second conclusion I would like, therefore, to draw is that minority protection must always consist of 2 pillars, legal protection and economic prosperity. The best legal measures for a minority are for no use if the minority to be protected cannot survive in its own traditional settlement area because it's forced to emigrate due to poor economic conditions. The South Tyrolean autonomy has, from the very beginning, linked cultural aspects with the economic well-being of the inhabitants. And it worked. The German and Latin minorities in South Tyrol are among the very few autochthonous minorities in Europe that are growing. That's really an exception. But there is even more. The autonomy status of South Tyrol has shown to be beneficial effects not only for the minorities, but for the entire population, minorities and majorities. It was a win-win situation even for the Italian state. Since the granting of autonomy in 1972, South Tyrol has developed from one of the poorest to one of the richest regions in Europe. You will all agree that states are better off with a wealthy region where they can collect taxes than with a poor region where they must send soldiers and police to put down conflicts, as this was the case in South Tyrol until the 1960s. Other autonomous rights granted to South Tyrol are bound to each linguistic group. Examples are the school system or the cultural measures. Each language group, Germans, Italians, and Ladins, have the right to an own school system in their own language in South Tyrol. As a result, there is a German and an Italian school in South Tyrol with instruction in the mother tongue and managed by people of the same linguistic group. Both school systems provide instruction essentially in the mother tongue with a compulsory presence of the respective second, Italian for the Germans, German for Italian, and English as the third common language. And in addition to the two big models, there is a small quadrilingual Latin school system. The most important insight for the school systems in South Tyrol, in my eyes, is that in addition to a very good teaching of the state language, the teaching of minority languages should be obligatory for all persons living in the minority area, regardless if they belong to the majority or the minority. Concerning the language rights, I will mention only one point. In South Tyrol, German has equal status with Italian as an official language, with Latin having equal rights at a lesser extent and limited territorially. The use of the mother tongue in the entire public sphere is a fundamental right of all citizens in South Tyrol. Every citizen has the right to address the public service in his language. That means that everyone employed in the public service must have command of these languages, and this is checked by proof. But this commitment to know all the languages is also rewarded financially with an allowance. And as I saw, the language is running faster than I thought. I will finish with a close remark, but I think it's important for our discussion. If we look at the situation of minorities throughout Europe, it is evident that they are best off where they have a dedicated autonomy. I will never tire to emphasize that autonomy is not contrary to the provisions found in several European constitutions, according to which the state is one and indivisible. This is also in the Italian constitution. Autonomy is nothing other than a very effective system of labor division between the central state and the downstream public level in South Tyrol. And it is accepted that the progress in civilization can be measured by the degree of division of labor, and that a meaningful division of labor usually increases productivity and efficiency. This effect of increased productivity and efficiency is clearly visible and measurable in South Tyrol according to demographic and economic indicators, and manifests itself precisely in the positive development of all language groups, majority and minorities. Sorry for being late.
Thank you very much. Köszönöm szépen. Annyit hozzátennék, hogy...
Thank you very much. Let me add that I was so lenient with the professor because he was speaking directly from my heart as he was speaking about autonomy. And I believe that many countries should take his message to heart because the South Tyrolean autonomy is viewed as a model all across Europe. So I deeply thank you for your presentation. And the next speaker is Madam Madlina Maling. As I have mentioned, she is representing the Sorbian minority in Saxony. She is a commissioner in charge of this minority. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, dear participants, and dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation to this high-level inspiring conference and for the opportunity to talk about the minority of the Sorbs in the Free State of Saxony, which maybe is not so well known to the audience here, and which maybe unfortunately has not the lucky status of the Ladins in Italy and is not a growing minority. So the Sorbs in Saxony are a Slavic minority without a kin state. They live in the eastern part of the Federal Republic of Germany in the federal states of Brandenburg and Saxony. And to understand the origins of the Sorbs, we have to take a look back to history. The origins of the Sorbs lie in the early Middle Ages when Slavic tribes settled the entire east of the river Elbe, which is now mostly known as the eastern parts of Germany. Later on, the German settlement movement in the High Middle Ages prevented the Slavs in the eastern parts of Germany to build their own sovereignty and their own statehood. In the centuries that followed, the majority of the Slavs assimilated, with only the Sorbs in Lusatia, the Sorbian settlement area, retaining their Slavic language and traditions. Today, the status of legal protection of the minorities in Germany is satisfying, as a study conducted by Professor Wiedesott shows, especially relevant for the protection of the Sorbs in Saxony on the European level are the conventions of the European Council. On the national level of importance is the Unification Treaty of the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic from 1990. And on the regional level, on the federal state level, we have special laws for the Sorbian people with detailed regulations. In addition, a state treaty between the federal state of Brandenburg and the federal state of Saxony on the establishment of the foundation for the Sorbian people guarantees the funding of Sorbian culture and language. The foundation is the first pillar of protection of the Sorbian minority in Saxony, and it's funded by the Federal Republic of Germany as well as by the federal states of Brandenburg and Saxony. The foundation currently has an annual funding volume of approximately 30 million euros per year. It funds several cultural institutions such as a museum, a publishing house, a theater, and so on. The second important pillar of the protection of the Sorbian minority is the school system with bilingual schools in the Sorbian settlement area. The number of pupils participating the Sorbian or attending the Sorbian schools is quite stable. Approximately 2,000 pupils attend these schools with bilingual education. In contrast to the good legal and funding framework, the socio-economic situation of the Sorbian people and of the whole region of Lusatia is quite difficult or less favorable, I would say. First, in the region of Lusatia, where the Sorbian settlement area is integrated, we see a dramatic loss of population beginning after unification with the Federal Republic of Germany. And second, the region is characterized by a relatively low economic power and a relatively low GDP per capita. So despite the relatively high level of funding and legal protection, we are seeing a decreasing number of speakers of the Sorbian language, which also means a decreasing number of the Sorbian people itself. We can currently assume that there are around 20,000 speakers, native speakers of the Sorbian language, and thus also around 20,000 people who identify themselves as Sorbs. Factors that contribute to the language change in Lusatia are first the limited domains of usage for the Sorbian language, which is restricted mostly to the family and some cultural institutions and the schools. And second, also of importance, is an acceptance gap. We see a relatively high general acceptance of the Sorbian language and of the Sorbian people, but a lower acceptance of the Sorbian language when it comes to direct language contact, for example, which motivates people to switch the language in direct contact situations. So concluding, I would say that the situation of the Sorbian minority is challenging for the preservation of language and culture, and that there are no easy solutions. But later on, I will talk about some best practice examples which could contribute and help to preserve the Sorbian identity, language, and culture.
Thank you very much. Köszönjük szépen a felszólalást.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And now the floor goes to Vice President Yuso, Vice Speaker Yuso, who is a member of the Sami Parliament. And I must commend you on your attire. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, representatives of Hungary, honorable participants. Let me first thank and show my appreciation for the organizers and the EU presidency of Hungary on inviting me in my role as a representative of my people, namely the Sami people, people from the far north, to be part of today's discussions. It can be that the Sami people's language relativeness here in Hungary do understand the necessity on including all Europeans to joint discussions. Maybe our historical relationship belonging to a same language group, Finno-Ugric, have us as peoples, as reindeer and the most farthest north of Europe in your memories. Maybe in the future EU presidencies of the Council will start to include us more in the joint endeavors. It is important that EU does not forget our issues and that it is actively engaging the Sami people. Let me remind that once a year of Arctic dialogue hosted by the European Commission, for example, is not enough or sufficient to allow us as representatives of our peoples to engage jointly in discussions of European issues. I've been invited to talk about good practices regarding minorities from perspective of rights. This is a really interesting question to me, as I and my people come from two sets of rights, namely rights of the minority and rights of indigenous people. It is crucial to understand that there are differences on these sets of rights. The rights of indigenous peoples are having clear established rights on self-determination, land and water and resources rights that many times are more than rights for minorities that has been specified. Also, right to participate for the decision-making is a bit different from consultation of minorities to free, prior and informed consent of indigenous peoples. This can be also one reason why there has been more activeness from the Sami towards United Nations and the framework of there than the European Human Rights Framework. Still, European Council's conventions do matter for us. Rights set out in the Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities and European Charter for Regional Minority Languages have had an impact. Especially important is on the monitoring work and advices and recommendations that are done through this work of the monitoring bodies of the conventions. I could say that the work of protection of my people's culture and languages is not any easier than 20 years ago, maybe because the states like Finland and Sweden are not always implementing our rights in a meaningful way. One good example of practice is the establishments of the Sami parliaments in Finland, Norway, and Sweden. First one in Finland already in 1973. This established and is based, of course, on the indigenous rights side, but it helps the state and our people itself that we can and are allowed to have collective views and represent those and push forward as a collective entity. This also helps the state side to realize what kind of views and visions we as a people have, and not just individual views from different regions of our areas. So there are structured consultative structures how we cooperate and engage with the states. There are differences between the states. Maybe the strongest constitutional recognition is on the Finnish side, maybe the most resources on the Norwegian side, and Swedish side is somewhere in between. The constitutional recognition is also a big part of being a minority or an indigenous peoples, because it establishes acceptance in the whole nation on having specific set rights. Another good example of practices is education subsidiary systems on the Finnish side. As said earlier today, language is one of the core elements of a minority as a group or as a people. The survival of language is tied to the question whether a group can extinct itself from another group or a majority population. The education in the Sami homeland area is fully covered by the state, not only in the Sami language education, but all education fields in the Sami language. So I can have education in mathematics or history in the Sami languages, and that establishes the premises for our societal improvements and discussions and cultural liveliness as the language is already established in the school systems to be acceptable and taught. Third example could be the cultural heritage aspect, especially on the Norwegian side, where the Norwegian state has accepted that the Sami Parliament of Norway governs the Sami cultural heritage sites and culture itself as an overall. I think it's a quite crucial point to understand that who can best preserve the cultural aspects and cultural heritage sites than the people itself that it is belonging to. And finally, maybe all of these minority policies or indigenous policies are tied to the political willingness. There is little to be done in those situations if political willingness is not to be found, or willingness to budget resources for these kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Köszönjük szépen, alelnök úr megszólalását.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, for that very interesting intervention. And I would dare to ask you, since we have heard from Madam Malling as well, that there is room for development when it comes to national minority policies, but hopefully during the course of the debate we can discuss that, where you see the fields where there is still room for development. However, before we turn to that, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Erika Kishney-Kulesh, who is Vice President and is also the spokesperson for Slovenian matters in the Hungarian National Assembly. The floor is yours. Madam Speaker, may I also extend my most heartfelt welcome to all the participants of today's conference. In 2024 in Hungary, we discussed the national policies of protecting national identities, and that is a very grateful topic. It is so because many things have changed in the past period, which had an influence on the life and the faith in the future and the maintenance of the cultural heritage of the 13 minorities living in Hungary. And I do believe that our warnings of our first king, Saint Stephen, to his son, Prince Imre, namely that a country of a single language and a single culture is weak, is taken very seriously in Hungary. Our diversity is guaranteed by the 13 minorities living in the country and is enriched. Our diversity is enriched. And even in our own lives, due to the fact that we provide a legislative background, provides for very serious results. If we look back on the recent history, it was in 1993 that the first time the Act on National and Ethnic Minorities was adopted in Hungary, which back then guaranteed the establishment of local government. And in the establishment of local government, the nationalities, local governments were also established. And after the first toddler steps, if you like, these organizations got strengthened and construction started, which was completed by the fundamental law of 2011, which established the national minorities as a factor of state establishment, and due to that, I believe that many of us live a dual identity, maintaining the cultural language of our ancestors, not to mention our identity, but we are also part of the Hungarian majority society. We graduated from schools in Hungary, and we also like and love Hungary. The fundamental law of 2011 and the Act on the Rights of National Minorities provides further opportunities, so the development could strengthen in various fields. I would also like to mention, first and foremost, the changes in public education. As early as 2010, the practice started that the minority national local governments could actually take into their own hands the schools of national minorities, schools providing education in the mother tongue. We also have bilingual schools, and we also have schools that teach the mother tongue. So up until 2012, there were only 8 such institutions. Now we have 107 such facilities available, schools which are maintained by the nationality local governments. However, obviously this requires the support of the Hungarian government, the special support, which we usually in a colloquial term call as a nationality quota. It's a supplementary subsidy which provides for the smooth operation of our schools, and it provides a guarantee for parents to enroll their kids in the school, and through these schools we can provide for the future of the national minorities living in Hungary, because for us it is the youth who will take over the role that we represent with our cultural values and traditions that we ourselves maintained and inherited from our ancestors, and handing these on is at least as important a task of us as it was for our ancestors to hand them over to us. Apart from the schools, the minority communities, that means apart from the schools, have all sorts of educational institutions, including kindergartens as well, and also an opportunity provided for extension training. We have public exhibitions, theaters, our own media, and these all serve the same purpose, to maintain our language, culture, and identity within a single majority society, Hungary. I asked Madam Speaker if I still have time, or Madam Chair, if I still have time, because I forgot to mention anything about the minority I belong to. Naturally, there will be an extra round provided for everyone where you can reflect upon what you heard from each other or reflect upon the questions that I already indicated. And I am very happy to see that Madam Vice Chair has mentioned that there is a very solid regulation available concerning minorities with the wording of our fundamental law, where minorities are regarded as a state founding factor, all minorities living in Hungary, and with the system that we provide a maximum amount of cultural autonomy. I believe that languages and the maintenance of traditions, the maintenance of their identity is provided for. And last but far from least, I would turn to State Secretary Lőrinc Nocsa, whom I would like to congratulate for assuming this new position. And I do believe that this is perhaps the first time that he addresses a parliamentary conference in the upper house chamber of parliament as a State Secretary on the topic of maintaining the culture of Hungarians living beyond the border of Hungary as national minorities themselves. And I think Hungary is in a very characteristic situation due to the fact that it's inherited the fact that it neighbors itself due to the characteristics of the 20th century. So in Slovakia, Romania, in Serbia, Croatia, we have Hungarian communities living next to the border. The floor is now yours, Mr. State Secretary, of 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's very good if the strictness of the bell appears during the course of the last intervention. You can actually apply it at the end of my intervention. May I also extend my heartfelt welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation of the Hungarian Parliament, where we can address these very important issues. As Madam Speaker has already mentioned, not due to our fault, but history took a course which resulted in the fact that the Hungarian nation is much larger than the Hungarian or the borders of Hungary, and the Hungarian national communities after the World War I, World War II, and as a result of the emigration of 1956, means that very many Hungarians live abroad in the Carpathian Basin and also in the diaspora further away from Hungary. From that aspect, this building itself teaches us a very important lesson where we are hosting you today. After the line of presentations during the course of lunch, you will be spending lunch in a room where, if you look up on the wall, you will see 5 castles painted, obviously, only one of which is located in today's Hungary, and that is where you can understand the first step of Hungarian national policy. So please don't forget to look at the walls during your lunch, because only the Visegrad Castle is still located in what is today known as Hungary. What is the objective of our national policy? I can provide you with a different perspective, because I will share with you the programs not through the eyes of national identity, which we perform in relation to maintaining the rights of national identities, but from a majority aspect, from the aspect of the Hungarian states. I can share with you what we do in order to ensure that the Hungarian communities survive beyond our borders, and not only survive but strengthen. The purpose of Hungarian national policy is not only to maintain our national minorities abroad, but also to strengthen them, and therefore we identify the fields where the maintenance of cultural heritage is possible. We do not observe cultural heritage as heritage alone, however. We don't believe that it is merely our heritage, we believe it is our future. And it is in this age that this heritage was placed in our hands, but this means it's important for the future generation as well, and therefore we identify the areas where we must provide the most support for Hungarians living abroad. The churches, the various denominations, sports, cultural institutions, various locations where young people can meet, and also the politics of Hungarians living abroad, because if the Hungarian community has a representative in the local governments and national governments in the countries of the Carpathian Basin where they historically were born, and where we can support their livelihoods and their place of birth, then obviously the power of the community will also grow. This is what we talk about in Slovakia, where we have the strongest Hungarian local government party is located. In Romania, we have parliamentary representation, and in Vojvodina, we also have local representation and national representation as well. And even in Ukraine, we had representation, and the Hungarian party is still present in local politics. In our national politics, we place a great emphasis on various educational institutions, primary, secondary, and tertiary education. We provide educational support for 230,000 young people in order for them to be able to study in Hungarian schools in the Hungarian language. And we support 8 tertiary education institutions, starting with operational costs all the way to development costs abroad. Since staying in one's place of birth we consider a value, and we should look at the cross-border projects as exemplary projects which have multiplied in the past years. And I'd like to thank the Hungarian or the national minorities living in Hungary as well, who aided us in establishing a relationship with their mother country. Let's just think of the Slovenian, Slovak and Bulgarian joint projects where we could initiate such cooperation. We believe that for identity, mother tongue and the support of cultures is most important, and that is why the Hungarian national policy enjoys the support provided by the central budget. We put significant expenses on maintaining our system of institutions and the survival of the Hungarian minority communities living abroad. And our hope is that even 120 years from now, these communities will enjoy a certain vitality abroad. And we always send them the message that they can count on us.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary. You got away with it, although I am having some positive feelings now because I have recollections from my time as speaker. I was given the bell during my speakership. I did have the opportunity to use the bell as many as 2 times, not only to clink on it, but I will refrain from doing it because I can tell you it's very loud. Now, the panel members, I am kindly asking you, would you like to respond to what has been said by your fellow panelists now, or we can continue working with the next part of our panel discussion, in which we will open the floor for contributions, and you will have 2.5 minutes to make that contribution. But let me give you a few points of reference for you to do so. Obviously, you will summarize the points that are most important for your own communities. But by way of orientation, allow me to raise a couple of questions. First and foremost, to what extent do you think it is important to maintain your cultural heritage for the long-term survival of your communities? And in this respect, I am also keenly interested in the opinion of the Deputy Speaker from the Sami Parliament and Madam Commissioner, as well as the professor from South Tyrol. So what is your position, the measures that you have adopted? Are these measures capable of maintaining the demographic situation of your communities, or you are seeing a reduction in spite of these positive measures? So this is number one. Number two, good practices are important. Let's share these good practices in this circle. And third, I am also curious, and let me tell you that I would like to know what your position is. What would be desirable? Let's remember the contribution made by Zsolt Németh, the Foreign Affairs Committee chair from the Hungarian Parliament. He said that we need to develop new mechanisms. Could you give us a few points of reference from your own experience? What are these points of reference that could well summarize our positions to be represented vis-à-vis the European Union, but also the Council of Europe? So what are the common denominators that we all share? Let me just remind you, recall a question that was raised yesterday, and this is practice in Hungary, that national minorities are recognized as constituent parts of the state. Is it the same in your countries? And I could go on and on with my questions, but obviously it's only 2.5 minutes that you will have, which is very, very limiting as to your ability to really give us a comprehensive overview of your situation. But first, let me give the floor to Mr. Maroto, the first Vice Speaker of the President of the Senate of Spain. No? Mr. Maroto has not yet arrived back into the hall, but let me turn to the members of the panel. I'm asking you whether you would like to take the floor concerning these questions. So first, the Deputy Speaker of the Sami Parliament, you have the floor.
It's a quite impossible task, but let me just try to shortly address the 3 points. I think the cultural heritage is, of course, really important, and in our case, I cannot highlight the importance of that. It's not only cultural heritage sites, but it is knowledge system. The cultural heritage of our people have established a long-sided knowledge system that helps us in reindeer herding or behavior of the nature, understanding of that, fishing and everything. So in order to preserve that, we need a vast areas of land to do that. And this is a big question that compiles also to the question of rights of minorities, that for example, in the cultural practices of reindeer herding or economical developments that we do have, how they are preserved by the nation states, for example, Sweden, Finland, and Norway. It is a big question, but of course an importance for us. Well, existing examples, there are so many examples, good or bad. I think the main point in this is that consultation or direct dialogue with the groups involved is the most important issue. And there needs to be political willingness to step outside of your own comfort zone and be willing to accept that there are visions and views of a group or a people, how to preserve their own cultural aspects and linguistical aspects. They might differ from the majority society views. There are examples, for example, where we have agreed jointly with Finland, Sweden, and Norway to have a language work, but a couple of years goes well, and then the budgetary guts hits, and our language work starts to crumble. It is because of the political will is changing. So I think that is really crucial one, that there needs to be a stable political willingness to actually allow minorities or indigenous peoples to thrive.
Kérdezem, hogy kívánnak-e Máling asszony.
Madam Malin, would you like to respond? Öné.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I maybe do not want to respond, but I want to follow my colleague from the Sami people, because I think, or I would agree that, of course, the cultural aspect, the common traditions and the common narratives, and most of all the common language are really cannot be estimated too highly for the survival of the community. I already mentioned a survey which was conducted 2 years ago, and we see a very high linkage between the language and the self-identification. So language should really be the core of the efforts for the preservation of the minority. But when it comes to traditions and customs, I think they are important too, because the traditions bring the people together, they structure the community life. And however, I think we have a very interesting debate now also among the Sorbian people, because I think that traditions must not become too rigid or stiff, because then there is a fear that they can become, that some people can become disconnected from them or even leave the community if they feel that there is some pressure on their personal life from these traditional settings. So among Sorbian women, we have a very interesting discussion now, debate about wearing the traditional Sorbian women's costumes, and for younger women in particular, it's important to wear only separate elements of the costume, combining them with modern modern clothes. And in my view, this is a very good way for the younger people to express their identity on the one side and not feel somehow backward looking on the other side. So this may be on the question of the cultural heritage.
Köszönöm szépen. Nem tudom, professzor úr kíván.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Professor, do you wish to take the floor?
Development of the minority. I said before that the Ladin minority is one of the very few growing in Europe, but this is true only for the valleys in the autonomy region. The same minority outside of the autonomy region decreases, and this is, in my eyes, a clear proof that autonomy is a very effective instrument for maintaining a language group. Second point, we are very focused on the transmission of language. We see it as essential that Ladins and Germans continue to speak Ladin and German. Traditions are very important, but our fear is traditions without a living linguistic culture are developing very fast to folklore and for the museum. And we don't want to be a part of a museum. We will be part of a living 21st century. And the third point, how can we remain a living part of the 21st century in that our language is not only or was not only useful for the 20 centuries before, because we used to speak Latin for 20 centuries now, but we want that this language is also useful for the next centuries. And now we are trying to do everything that Latin, even if it's a very small language, we are 30,000, is included in all instruments of artificial intelligence, of translation, of mobile phone and so on, because these are now the pencils of the 21st century. And minority languages cannot remain outside of these fundamental instruments.
Köszönöm szépen. Aztán egy nagyon fontos dolgot mondott.
Thank you very much. I think Professor mentioned something very important, that we should not assume the position of reservatism, if you like, of a museum in maintaining the national minorities, but that the national minorities should be alive, a living 21st century community. Therefore, I would continue to inspire you to word recommendations. And I do believe that in the presence of Professor Livro, I believe it would help us help him to add something to his report, because Monsieur Lebrun came up with many important aspects when we talk about the shortcomings of the European Union. As for you, Professor, what you stated in relation to South Tyrol, I previously had an expectation, but I think it would be worth for the European community to deal with the examination of what models of autonomy it could develop in order to ensure that it would not be a position or an assumption of an open-air museum when we're talking about national minorities in Europe. Ms. Erika Kishne-Kulesh indicated that she would like to share a few thoughts on the Slovenian community, her own minority community. The floor is yours. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. A few items have been mentioned by those before me. The Slovenian community also has a strive to maintain the cultural heritage in a way that it is not maintained in a world of folklore only. And that is why we make efforts and take measures in order to ensure reliving or reanimation of old parts of life, like, for instance, renovating an old mill, if you like, where we apply the traditional working methods applied by our ancestors, which would allow us to present these old methods, but also to involve the youth of today in the various stages of the work process, which can be sold for tourists in tourism, obviously, and through which we can also maintain our language and culture. Obviously, the number or the size of the minority, as Madam Speaker has already mentioned, will strengthen. The 2022 census showed a one-third increase in relation to the Slovenian minority, and I am certain that the minority policy of Hungary and the life that was re-established contributed greatly to that increase. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we can articulate it in the following way. We need a minority policy of the 21st century. So that is why we should voice and articulate these requirements and expectations. Professor Veresud referred to artificial intelligence. I wrote a question to artificial intelligence asking it, how are you? And the answer was, I have no emotions. So I think this is how we should approach artificial intelligence, because I believe that the matters we are discussing here today cannot be approached in an entirely schematic manner. So therefore, I would like to ask the State Secretary to provide us with an intervention if he wishes to give us one. 2 points. First off, for the time being, in European community or minority community protection, we should use simple intelligence in the first place. No need for artificial intelligence as yet. As we have seen, citizens' initiatives have been put on the back burner by the Commission. These issues have been swept off the table. I think it would be sufficient for us to use our own primary intelligences to achieve a better outcome. And as for cultural heritage, it is a very dangerous idea to think of cultural heritage as something that belongs to a glass case in a museum. So let me recall the words work that cannot be avoided in national minority communities, and that is the digitization and the preservation and the transposition of our heritage, so that the memoirs of still living members of our communities are properly recorded. And this work cannot be initiated early enough, and it has to be pursued relentlessly on an ongoing basis, because it is vitally important that all these heritage-related assets remain available to our successors as well. So this work needs to be pursued on a continuous basis. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now I open the floor for the short contributions of 2.5 minutes. We have 9 contributors. If you would like to join, please let us know. Ferenc Horváth, representing the Slovenian National Assembly, and also a chair of a committee, will be the first to talk. Feri, you have the floor. I apologize for using your short name, but we have been acquaintances for a long time. Thank you for the floor, Madam Speaker, dear colleagues. I could also speak in English, but I will use my own Hungarian native language because we are talking about indigenous autochthonous minorities. Let us use our rights. In Slovenia, national minority rights are being represented at a very high level. Slovenia is home to a number of minorities, but 2 of these, the Italian and the Hungarian minorities, have their rights recognized in the Constitution. These are viewed as autochthonous minorities. As I have mentioned, in several sections of the Constitution, our rights are enshrined, and we have in addition 200 pieces of legislation on these rights. And I am firmly convinced that we can talk of a kind of cultural autonomy being the case in Slovenia, because the state does not only provide us with a legal framework, but to a significant extent also budget funding that eventually make the operation of our institutional system possible. What is very positive, and positive things have indeed happened over the past several years, namely the Hungarian and the Slovenian governments, irrespective of their political affiliations, provided significant resources to the Moravian Hungarian community and the Slovenian community in Hungary. And as a result of this, we have implemented a number of projects that we could not have implemented. And in a number of heritage protection issues, we created lasting value. And as the State Secretary pointed out, it is crucial that our efforts will not belong in a museum. We should infuse life into the communities, because that's how we create value. The most recent excellent example of this joint work has been the renovation of the St. Catherine Church in Lendava, and both states made a significant financial contribution to the project. I think it's shameful that in the European Union, minority rights are not guaranteed at the level of the European Union. I am not saying this because of Slovenia, because Slovenia is a very positive example in this and could act as a flagship country. And of course, the good practices exist, and I'm afraid there is a lack of political will in some cases, and that's what needs to be overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am in a situation that I am facing with my back to the counter, so I would like to ask the speakers to take into consideration the allocated time and don't embarrass me by having to ring my bell. Federico Mollicone is up next once again. So I would kindly ask Mr. Representative or MP to continue his intervention started in the previous block. Thank you. As for the good examples, the previously mentioned the Historic Revitalization Act, as described above, provides for the recognition of all intangible cultural heritage as a component of the identity and historic value of individuals, local communities, and the national community. This is true for Tyrol as well. In this sense, the text empowers the government to adopt regulations for their preservation. In our opinion, the law adopted could be a good practice for all European countries where historical revitalization has always been used to enhance culture, as we have heard from our Slovenian colleague, but where there has been a lack of a regulatory framework. In defense of our cultural heritage, we have therefore once again not failed to promote the efficiency of museum management and the competitiveness of the system with an Italy on stage proposal. Within the framework of the Cultural Heritage Code and the Italian Public Procurement Code, the text aims to ensure more efficient, effective and economically and financially sustainable management of institutions, cultural sites and cultural assets of public interest. This new law will promote the participation of private bodies. With the regional autonomy provided by the Meloni government in Italy, with the law on historic reconstruction and the Code of Intellectual Heritage that is now being adopted by Parliament, we are rediscovering our common centuries-old history and breathing new life into small villages, inland and mountain settlements and all the local identities that make Italy and Europe great. We are in agreement with Hungarians and all those peoples who defend traditions and historical identities against cultural relativism, which wants to erase them, and against the woke ideology, which wants to reread history in the light of contemporary political correctness. The Europe of the homelands has its own particularities, its own specificities, which have radiated and given life to Western civilization. It is right to rediscover and preserve them in the name of what is inscribed here before this magnificent Parliament, Pro Patria et Libertate. Thank you very much, Mr. MP. Pedro Sousa is up next from the Portuguese Parliament.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is both an honor and a privilege to address this distinguished panel today in a forum dedicated to culture and the identity of national communities, a cornerstone of Europe's shared humanist and democratic tradition. Portugal, as a proud republic anchored in the values of liberty, equality and solidarity, draws its inspiration from two vital documents, the Constitution of the Portuguese Republic and also the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. Both affirm an unwavering commitment to human dignity, cultural diversity, and the equality of all citizens. These principles are the bedrock of our approach to protecting the rights of national minorities. Portugal's historical trajectory has taught us the power of pluralism, from the resilience of our democratic institutions after a long dictatorship to the embrace of linguistic and cultural minorities. Our path underscores and safeguarding diversity is not a moral imperative, but also a driver of collective progress. In Portugal, we have a very homogeneous reality, and we only have a traditional ethnic minority, the Gypsy community. Therefore, we have settled since 2013 a national strategy for the integration of Gypsy communities, comprising various programs for education, health, housing, employment, inclusion, integration, and cultural mediation. Despite being a very homogeneous country, we have a linguistic minority, a language that has existed and endured for over 1,000 years and that is used, spoken and written only in a specific region of the country. Mirandês, the second official language of the Portuguese Republic since 1999, and we've been doing an extensive set of things and initiatives to defend and promote it. By combining education programs, housing initiatives and access to healthcare, we work to ensure that every citizen, irrespective of their cultural identity, can participate fully in our society. Yes, yet, as we celebrate good practice, we are not complacent. We cannot forget the words of one of the heroes of the Portuguese democratic revolution, who said, "Freedom is not a concession, is a conquest, not a concession. Protecting the rights of minorities is one of those conquests, one we must pursue tirelessly." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Köszönjük szépen, képviselő úr.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And next is Andrea Wiesbeck, representing the upper house of the Dutch Parliament. Madam Wiesbeck, you have the floor.
Thank you. I told you earlier that the Frisian language is known as an official language in the Netherlands. And the Dutch government supports the Frisian language, but there are several regional languages like Limburgs and Twents who also strive to get a similar recognition. Regional languages that slowly fade out. Every year, less people know and speak those regional languages, and they also deserve our attention and protection. Each region has its own cultural heritage, among which monuments, landscapes, and traditions. For example, the Friese and Groningse churches or the West-Friese pyramid-shaped farms known as stolpboerderijen, but also typical Frisian sports like vierleppen and kaatsen, and the typical Frisian landscape with the lakes and the turfs, that the small handmade hills that serve to protect the people against the water, like later our famous Afsluitdijk and the Deltawerken. We think it's important that traditional minorities in Holland and Europe are protected, feel safe and appreciated. We can learn from each other, and therefore we think it's very important to be here today in this magnificent palace to listen to each other, to listen to each other's stories. Listening to each other can be the sort of understanding we need and to recognize each other's problems, which is necessary for a better future, both in the Netherlands and in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes you need to look back to make better progress. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen, képviselő asszony.
Thank you very much, Madam MP. Madam Kruzman, member of the Spanish House of Representatives. Thank you very much for participating in the Interparliamentary Conference on Cultural Heritage and Identity of National Communities. I'd like to share with you something in relation with flamenco. In 2005, flamenco was part of the World Cultural Heritage, and it is a heritage of Europe. It is a culture, an art which was passed from father to son for centuries, and which came from the Gypsy, the Roma community. This Roma community managed to merge this culture with jazz, with pop. Everyone we know flamenco. It is safe to say that this is a regional and social wealth as well. And we see that we require political support. What are we talking about? We should not be divided, but attached to each other by this cultural heritage. In Andalusia, the first Flamenco Act was adopted, in which a framework was established that protects the tradition and art of flamenco, and also strives to increase its popularity. I do believe that it's very important that we be able to use this good example throughout Europe, because from the Roman Empire through the Greek-Roman culture, this was always an umbilical cord to us, music that's attached to our people, and therefore minorities can consider themselves very important. Thank you so much, and also thank you, MP, for keeping to the allocated time. And Namarta Jorgina Dominica is up next from the Spanish Senate. She's not here. Then we'll step on. We can save on time, ladies and gentlemen. Avila Guterres is up next from the Spanish Senate, member of the chair. Good afternoon to all of you. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Juan Avila, member of the Senate Committee, in fact, the chairperson of the Senate Committee, and at the same time, I'm also a mayor in a fabulous ancient little settlement near Sevilla. And this is a part of the World Heritage stated by UNESCO. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate at this conference and for the opportunity to speak before you, since obviously we are all enriched if we share with each other our experiences, therefore providing a better future to everyone. We are all humans, yet we are all different. One is brown-haired, the other is black-haired, fair-haired, curly-haired, straight-haired, and our history, our habits, our customs provide our identity. Our settlement has a history of 7,000 years. It was established prior to the Roman Empire. Everyone passed through our area, including Muslims, but we are all members of the great human family. We have memories from this historical heritage, and the main essence is that the generations of the future remain on the foundation of respect, therefore maintaining their heritage. We have fabulous clothing, but what purpose does that serve? Namely, that we can show ourselves, what we identify with. We can show our region, our people, and this is what we must protect and we must maintain for the upcoming years. And that is how, based upon integrity, integration, and respect, we can project a better future that we strive to achieve. This fabulous cultural heritage that makes Europe great, and what we have to construct and build should not serve the purposes of being antagonistic to each other.
Thank you very much. Susanna Nordström from Sweden. You have the floor.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much to get me the opportunity to speak to you here today. I represent the Swedish Parliament. I've been thinking, the minorities need a strong and fair representation in decision-making process and on a national level, and also, of course, on the EU level. I need my glasses. You write down and then you can't read it. That's good. How politicians are elected differences from country to country. Is it more difficult for minorities to get elected? And if so, why? As I see it, you got the politicians you deserve because they, or shall I say we, have been elected. That is how it works in a democracy. What can we do on a national level to increase the minorities' representation? If we are serious about the respect for nations' uniqueness and the involvement of minorities, we have to start at home in national elections. I believe that the protection of minorities is important to preserve the uniqueness of our countries. In Sweden, wrong paper. In Sweden, for example, we have 5 recognized minorities, but we have one group who isn't recognized. They have their own language. The grammar and some letters in the are very different from the Swedish language. I can't understand what they are saying. And we are a group of politicians who is working to help them to get their language, Älvdalian, recognized as a minority language. As an earlier speaker said today, language is important to save minorities' rights. Thank you very much.
Köszönöm szépen. Azt külön köszönöm képviselő asszonynak.
Thank you very much. I thank you, Madam Member of Parliament, in particular, for having kept your time in such an accurate manner. And last but not in the least, Madam Maria José Gomez is coming next. coming up next. No, she is not here. So at this point, I would like to thank you, Madam and Mr. Members of Parliament, for your extraordinary high level of activity. I believe we have raised very intriguing questions concerning, for example, representation in parliaments, or, as Professor Videsot said, autonomy can be the solution. This is very intriguing as well. It is a solution, a potential solution for upholding the language and the culture of national minorities. A third point I would like to make is that the information we have received, and we have in a way recognized and recorded, that we need to have a minority policy worthy of the 21st century, because we are in the middle of the third decade of the 21st century. However, we might need to have a separate conference on existing legislation. Many of them adopted 30 years ago in the European Union, whether it is time for us to amend them, to implement certain corrections. We in Hungary are planning to table a proposal on this. We hope that we can help the work of the Council of Europe as well as the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the President of the Parliamentary Assembly will appreciate it, and that you, Mr. Levrun, will also appreciate it. With these words, I would like to close the work of the panel. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and with these words, I pass the presidency to Chairman of the Committee, Károly Páncél, and I wish you a beautiful Advent period to all of you.
Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim!
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed a very interesting and valuable podium discussion. I would like to thank the participants and also Madam Chair. Since today's conference is an EU parliamentary program, I would finally and respectfully ask Deputy Minister Zsigmond Barna to provide a presentation on the Hungarian EU presidency. Mr. Deputy Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, distinguished Mr. Speaker, distinguished Madams and Messieurs Presidents, Speakers, distinguished heads of delegations, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. Thank you very much for the honor of this opportunity to inform you about the Hungarian presidency's priorities at the Interparliamentary Conference on Cultural Heritage and the Identity of National Communities. As it is well known, on the 1st of July 2024, Hungary took over the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union amidst extraordinary challenges. Our presidency is not only an honor, but also a responsibility. We are working for a Europe based on shared values and interests, capable of responding to the historic challenges of our time. During the 6-month period, Hungary has been and is still determined to ensure a smooth institutional transition of the European Union. To highlight just a few important achievements, the EU budget has been adopted, we have held Hungary's biggest diplomatic summit, we have adopted the Competitiveness Pact, and it seems that we are making breakthroughs on the Schengen accession of Romania and Bulgaria. However, the work shall continue in the upcoming weeks. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we regret to see that there is a serious divergence between the views of the Brussels elite and those of the people of Europe. Today, member states are increasingly being dominated by a centralized and over-politicized institutional system which runs against our earlier vision. Indeed, the nations of the region imagined accession as a way of being stronger together than apart through the devolution or joint exercise of certain powers. Our objective was not to surpass nation-states, but to strengthen them. We are still working today to make the European Union what the founding fathers envisaged. European integration was not about giving up our national sovereignty and independence, quite the opposite. We believe that what is needed in the European Union, as the founding fathers also believed, is to strengthen the culture of political consensus building. It is along these lines that we have developed our presidency priorities, the objectives of the Hungarian presidency. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Europe is constantly losing competitiveness as a result of the crises, which is why competitiveness is at the heart of the Hungarian presidency's program. It is a particular success of the presidency that at the informal European Council meeting on the 8th of November, the European heads of state and government adopted a declaration on strengthening European competitiveness. The Budapest Declaration aims to secure shared economic prosperity and boost EU competitiveness, ensuring the EU's sovereignty, security, resilience, and global influence. The Budapest Declaration states that competitiveness is not only and not exclusively an economic policy issue, but requires a holistic approach. There are dimensions of all policies that have a competitiveness relevance, and the EU institutions should assess all policies from a competitiveness perspective. The Hungarian presidency will also pay particular attention to the external dimension of migration, including cooperation with relevant third countries on the basis of mutual benefits, increasing the efficiency of return processes, and developing innovative solutions for managing asylum and migration in third countries. We are not alone in this today, as more and more people are saying that the EU's migration policy so far is not the right direction, and this would not be the case without the Hungarian EU presidency. Together with other member states, we reject the aspirations of the Asylum and Migration Pact. We believe the Migration Pact does not provide a real solution and is a magnet for illegal immigrants in Europe. The pact does not address the migration crisis in any meaningful way, and some elements of it will only exacerbate it. The Hungarian position on migration is that the most important thing is that illegal immigrants should not be allowed to enter and that applications should be processed outside Europe. In recent years, Hungary has spent some 800 billion forints, 2 billion euros on border protection, which is not only for the security of Hungary, but for the security of the whole EU. Despite these efforts, the Court of Justice of the European Union has imposed an unprecedented fine on Hungary for consistently protecting our borders. A lump sum of 200 million euro and an additional 1 million euro per day are being imposed in Hungary for failing to comply with the provisions of the Reception Conditions Directive and the Return Directive, and for protecting our borders. Ladies and gentlemen, under our presidency, we also pay particular attention to the issue of protection policy. Defense policy, rather. The war between Russia and Ukraine has once again highlighted the need for the European Union to take greater responsibility for its own security. It must strengthen its defense cooperation and its capacity for flexible and independent action in its strategic interests. The Hungarian presidency will place particular emphasis on stimulating defense-related innovation and on enhancing cooperation between member states in the field of defense procurement. We also have on our agenda the advancement of the enlargement process, especially the integration of the Western Balkans. The Hungarian government is committed to a credible and merit-based enlargement policy. The European Union cannot be complete without the accession of the Western Balkans, which would be beneficial for the Union from an economic, security and geopolitical point of view.
A decemberi Európai Tanács ülését megelőzően december 18-án kerül sor.
The EU Western Balkans Summit will take place on the 18th of December prior to the December European Council. This summit will be an excellent opportunity for EU member states to express their commitment to the European perspective of the Western Balkans. The Hungarian presidency has clear objectives in relation to the accession of all the countries concerned in the region. In the case of Serbia, for example, a key state in the region, the holding of an intergovernmental conference to open the third negotiating chapter on growth and competitiveness is an essential element in advancing the integration process. Hungary is committed to full Schengen membership for Romania and Bulgaria. During the Hungarian presidency a few days ago, the Hungarian, Austrian, Romanian and Bulgarian ministers of interior expressed their agreement that Romania and Bulgaria should become full members of the Schengen area, or could become full members of the Schengen area as of the 1st of January 2025, not only by air and sea, but also by land. And hopefully this will be fulfilled on December the 12th at the summit of the Ministers of Interior. In addition to the above priorities, our presidency will also give priority to demographic challenges, the future of cohesion policy, and a farmer-centered agricultural policy. By creating a farmer-centered agriculture policy, Hungary wants to ensure that the agriculture of the future is crisis-resistant or crisis-resilient, competitive, sustainable, farmer-centered and knowledge-based. Another success of the presidency in adoption of a council declaration on the promotion of Jewish life.
Mindig számíthatnak a magyar kormány támogatására.
Anti-Semitism, thus expressing Hungary's priority in the fight against anti-Semitism. As always, the Jewish people can count on the support of the Hungarian government. This is a particularly important stand at a time when we are facing an increasing number of anti-Semitic attacks in Western Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, from the very beginning, the Hungarian government has paid special attention to supporting Hungarians living beyond the borders of Hungary and preserving our identity and culture. We pay special attention to the issue of indigenous national minorities not only at home, but also at EU level, and to this end we are endeavouring to emphasize the importance of this issue in all possible forums, including the institutions of the Council of Europe as well as the EU. During the Hungarian presidency, we will also give priority to the protection of national minorities. Some 50 million people in the European Union belong to indigenous national minorities or speak a minority language. The European Citizens Initiative, the Minority Safe Pack, was intended to include certain areas of national, ethnic and linguistic minority protection in European Union law. This is the most important initiative on minority rights in the last 30 years, and we hope that the process, which has been dragging on for more than a decade, can slowly come to a positive conclusion, that the Commission will adopt and present legislative proposals to protect minority rights. We will not give up on that fight of ours. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Europe's cultural heritage is extremely rich and diverse, bequeathed to us by previous generations of Europeans, and will continue to be a legacy for future generations. It is therefore our priority to preserve, nurture and maintain this heritage. The European Union is a major supporter of heritage conservation, with policy initiatives such as the European Heritage Framework, which aims to protect said heritage. The European Heritage Sites Programme has recognized buildings and sites of particular importance for our common European identity, such as the Liszt Ferenc Music Academy, the Dohány Street Synagogue, the Pan-European Picnic Memorial Park and the town of Szentendre in Hungary. The management of built heritage is based on the principle of eternal value, according to which these sites should not only be treated as heritage, but as a kind of loan to be guaranteed and preserved for future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, finally, some figures on the presidency. In the course of the 6 months, we held approximately 250 presidency events, 37 formal council meetings in Brussels and Luxembourg, 16 informal meetings in Budapest, and 3 informal summits, 2 of which the IPC summit on the 7th of November and the informal European Council meeting on the 8th of November have already been successfully organized. As a real diplomatic powerhouse, the whole of Europe was focused on Budapest during those 2 days. We believe that the success of the Hungarian presidency is a success for the whole of Europe. And the European Union can only be successful if we all follow the treaty rules we have all agreed upon. Therefore, we need common thinking, a European alternative that creates unity in Europe while respecting the sovereignty of nation-states. It is fantastic that we can belong to a common European Union and we can enjoy the benefits of a common European Union across border space, free movement and residence, free movement of goods and services, the opportunities of EU citizenship. I believe that as member states, we therefore have a shared responsibility to preserve our European heritage, and it is important that in these difficult times we get the Union back on track. As the motto of the presidency says, let's make Europe great. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Thank you for the information you have provided to us. And now we have come to the closing of the conference, which also marks the last parliamentary program of the rotating presidency held by Hungary. I thank Speaker Kövér for attending our conference and for having supported us in organizing the conference, for having given us the venue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also thank the participants of the conference for the time we have spent together, and I believe that we have looked at the colorful European cultural heritage from many different perspectives, including also the position of national minorities, and I hope that we managed to emphasize that protecting our cultural heritage in Europe is inseparable from the promotion and the protection of the rights of linguistic and national communities. If a community was to give up its cultural heritage, it would be condemned to disappearance, and Europe would become poorer by linguistic and other cultural heritages losing ground. I believe that we have underlined that all this is closely intertwined with the implementation of democratic principles, because the protection of minorities is a yardstick for democracy. Almost 50 million people in Europe belong to autochthonous national minorities, and these people live under different circumstances. I think it's fair to conclude that we all believe that these people are values in Europe. These people are treasures to us. They are treasures to their national communities and to us all. So we are talking of a treasure for Europe. I would like to thank Federico Morricone, a member of the Italian delegation, for using the phrase a Europe of homelands, of birthplaces. This is the mindset we need. A couple of years ago, the United Nations adopted a decision under which migration is a fundamental human right. We would like to see the right to remaining in our birthplaces to be adopted as a fundamental human right. This would ensure all across Europe the right to survive and to prosper and to thrive in our homelands, in our birthplaces. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I hope that the fellow members of parliament will find their stay in Budapest useful and also entertaining, and that you will cherish the moments you have spent here with us. I thank my colleagues for their help. I thank the interpreters and the technical team for their work as well, and distinguished conference participants. Although the nights are still getting longer and the daytime is getting shorter, but light will conquer darkness. We are in the Advent period, at the end of which light will be born again, manifested in the birth of our Savior Jesus Christ. I wish you blessed Advent, the expectations waiting, and a very beautiful and happy Christmas. And with these words, let me close the conference, but I respectfully invite you all to the Hunters Hall for lunch, and I thank you for your participation. God bless you all.